No one could stop the principal's relentless expulsions, until a 4-year-old boy stepped up to the microphone. In schools across America, zero-tolerance policies have led to over 3 million suspensions a year, with black students expelled at 4 times the rate of their white peers. But at Oakwood Elementary, the only person brave enough to confront the principal was a cafeteria worker's son, who hadn't even started kindergarten yet. This is the story of Principal Marcus Thorne and his ironclad mandate to clean up Oakwood Elementary by any means necessary. For months, his zero-tolerance campaign had expelled 47 students, almost all of them black or brown, for offenses like talking back or missing homework. Parents protested. Teachers resigned. But the district office saw rising test scores and called it a success. The only person left who saw the broken kids crying in the cafeteria was Maria, the lunch lady. And when the expulsion letter came for her son, she had a choice: accept the system or teach her 4-year-old how to break it. Marcus Thorne arrived at Oakwood Elementary in August with a plan he called the Reset. He was 49 years old, a former military school administrator with a graduate degree in educational leadership and a belief system forged in data points. He saw Oakwood not as a school, but as a failing institution. Test scores in the bottom 15th percentile, attendance rates crumbling, and discipline referrals that had tripled in 3 years. The district superintendent gave him one directive: fix it, by any means necessary. His first faculty meeting lasted 11 minutes. He stood at the front of the library, hands clasped behind his back, and said, "We are no longer in the business of managing chaos. We are in the business of eliminating it." Then he handed out the new discipline matrix, a single page laminated. Fighting meant automatic expulsion. So did defiance. So did repeated tardiness. So did using a phone in class. There were no warnings, no parent conferences, no restorative circles. Just removal. 3 teachers resigned that first week. One of them, Ms. Alvarez, who had taught 3rd grade at Oakwood for 17 years, told him to his face, "You're not fixing children, you're discarding them." Thorne didn't flinch. He said, "We're prioritizing the learning environment for the students who choose to be here." He had the phrase printed on banners that hung in the hallway: "Choose to be here." The first expulsion happened on a Tuesday in September. A 12-year-old named Darius shoved another boy in the lunch line. According to the old code, it would have been a 3-day suspension and a mediation. Under Thorne's matrix, it was an immediate removal. Darius's mother, a nurse working double shifts, begged for another chance. Thorne showed her the laminated sheet. "Policy," he said. "It protects everyone." Darius was gone by noon. This is the part most people miss. It wasn't just about the big fights. It was about the silent erosion. The second expulsion was a girl named Chloe who rolled her eyes and muttered, "This is stupid," during a math lesson. Defiance. Removal. The third was a boy named Isaiah who had missed 17 days of school because his mother didn't have a working car. Truancy. Removal. By October, 23 students had been expelled. The local newspaper ran a story titled "Zero Tolerance or Zero Compassion." Thorne kept a copy of the article framed on his desk. He considered it a badge of honor, proof he was doing the hard work others refused to do. The district office sent him a commendation. Test scores, they noted, had already improved by 7% in the tested grades. Fewer disruptions, quieter halls. They called it the Thorne effect. But if you walked the halls of Oakwood, you felt a different effect, a coldness. Students moved between classes without talking. Teachers avoided eye contact with Thorne. The laughter that used to spill from the cafeteria was gone, replaced by the quiet clatter of trays and the low hum of fear. And in the center of that fear, moving through it every single day, was Maria Reyes. She arrived at 4:45 every morning before the sun was up to start the industrial ovens for breakfast. Her world was one of stainless steel and steam, of calculating portions and wiping down tables. She had worked in the Oakwood cafeteria for 8 years. She knew every child by name, and more importantly, she knew which ones came to school hungry, which ones saved their fruit cup for a younger sibling, which ones had a look in their eyes that meant they hadn't slept. Her son, Jamal, was 4 years old. His father had been gone since before Jamal could talk, another kind of absence that required its own quiet calculus. Maria's babysitter, her sister, started work at 6. So every morning, Maria brought Jamal with her. He slept on a folded blanket in her small office until the first bell rang. Then he'd sit at a corner table in the cafeteria with a coloring book while she worked the lunch line. He was a quiet boy, observant, with a habit of watching people's hands to see if they were nervous. Maria saw the expulsions from the serving line. She saw Darius crying as a security guard walked him out. She saw Chloe's mother screaming in the office. She saw the empty seats at the tables grow, one by one, like missing teeth in a smile. And she saw the faces of the children who remained. They were scared. A fourth grader named Carlos, who used to joke with her every day about the mystery meat, stopped talking altogether. He just pointed at the food he wanted. One afternoon in late October, Maria was mopping the cafeteria floor when she found a notebook under a table. It belonged to a girl named Zoe, who had been expelled the week before for yelling at a teacher. The notebook was open to a page with a drawing. A stick figure teacher with a giant red X over her face, and next to it, written in shaky cursive, "I'm not bad, I'm sad." Maria closed the notebook. She handed it to the front office. She said nothing. But that night, putting Jamal to bed in their 2-room apartment above a laundromat, she held him a little tighter. "You be good at school, okay, Mijo?" Jamal, half asleep, nodded. "I'm always good, Mama." Meanwhile, Thorne was compiling his data. He created a spreadsheet tracking every expulsion, the reason, the demographic information. He presented it to the school board in November. A PowerPoint slide showed a graph with 2 lines. A red line plummeting down represented discipline incidents. A green line soaring up represented standardized test scores. He called it the trade-off. He said, "We have removed the anchors so the ship can sail." What the spreadsheet didn't show was that 31 of the 34 students expelled were Black or Latino. It didn't show that 15 of them had documented learning disabilities. It didn't show that the anchors he mentioned were children like Ben, expelled for having a headache pill in his backpack, or Lacey, expelled for wearing a hat in class after losing her hair to chemotherapy. The school board applauded. They gave him a budget increase for security cameras. They did not ask to see the faces behind the data points. Maria started paying closer attention to Thorne. She watched him pace the hallways during lunch, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. She saw how he never smiled at the children, only nodded as if acknowledging their compliance. She heard the way he spoke to teachers, a cold, clipped tone that brooked no argument. She understood, with the clarity of someone who has spent a life navigating difficult systems, that he was not a monster. He was a man who had replaced compassion with a flowchart. And in his flowchart, children were either assets or liabilities. The breaking point for the staff came in December. A beloved art teacher, Mr. Evans, was fired. His crime: he had allowed a group of students to paint a mural in the hallway celebrating diversity. Thorne ordered it painted over. "School decor must be neutral and achievement-oriented," he said. When Mr. Evans argued, Thorne cited insubordination. He was gone by the end of the day. The day Mr. Evans left, the faculty lounge was silent. Maria was emptying the trash bins when she heard a young teacher whisper, "Who's next? Who's left?" Nobody had an answer. Jamal, in his quiet way, was watching too. He didn't understand expulsions or policies, but he understood that his mama was tense. He understood that fewer big kids smiled at him in the cafeteria. He saw the man in the suit who made the teachers look at their shoes. One morning, while coloring at his table, Jamal saw Principal Thorne walk past. Jamal pointed a crayon at him and said, very quietly, "That man has a storm in him." Maria dropped a tray. The crash echoed in the empty cafeteria. She hurried to clean it up, her heart pounding. She hadn't taught Jamal that word. Storm. She didn't know where he'd gotten it, but she knew he was right. By January, the expulsions had reached 47. The local NAACP chapter filed a civil rights complaint. Protesters stood outside the school gates with signs that read, "Our children are not data." Thorne responded by sending a district-wide email. "Oakwood is a bastion of learning," he wrote. "We will not be intimidated by those who prioritize chaos over excellence." The pressure was a living thing in the building. Then, on a cold morning in February, Maria arrived at work to find a yellow envelope in her staff mailbox. It was from the principal's office. Her hands went cold. She tore it open. Inside was not a pink slip, not for her. It was a notice for a mandatory student behavior review regarding Jamal Ray's. The reason stated: excessive non-instructional presence on school grounds, a disruption to the learning environment. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 3 p.m. Maria read the words 3 times. Non-instructional presence. He was 4. He sat at a table and colored. He was her son. She looked up from the letter through the small window of her office into the empty cafeteria, at the table where Jamal colored, at the silent, gleaming space that felt less like a school every day. She thought about Darius, about Chloe, about Zoe's notebook. She thought about the storm. And she made a decision. She would not beg. She would not cry. She would teach her son one last lesson before they took him away. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. Friday was 2 days away. The all-school assembly was tomorrow. The morning of the assembly, Oakwood Elementary, was a pressure cooker about to blow. Thorne had ordered every student and staff member into the auditorium for what he called a school culture address. Rumors swirled that more budget cuts were coming, that more teachers would be fired. The air in the building tasted like metal and anxiety. Maria went through her morning routine on autopilot. Scrambled eggs for Jamal, packing his small backpack with crayons and a juice box. But her hands shook as she buttoned his white polo shirt, the one that was a size too big because she couldn't afford the next size up yet. She knelt in front of him, fixing his collar. "Baby, listen to me. Today, Mama has a very important meeting. You're going to sit with Mrs. Gable in the library during the assembly, okay?" Jamal nodded, his dark eyes serious. "Is it about the storm man?" Maria's breath caught. "Yes, Mijo, it is." But here, what Maria didn't know, the letter in her mailbox wasn't just a warning. It was a blueprint. Thorne had spent the previous evening on a conference call with the district superintendent and the school board's legal counsel. They were preparing for the NAACP's civil rights complaint. Their strategy was twofold. First, demonstrate that every disciplinary action was strictly by the book and applied equally. Second, show that even their own employees understood and supported the policy. Maria, as a low-wage hourly worker with a child in constant, unauthorized attendance, was their test case. If they could get her to formally acknowledge that Jamal's presence was a disruption, if they could get it in writing, they could use it to dismantle the entire discrimination claim. She wasn't just fighting for her son's right to color in the cafeteria. She was being set up as the star witness for the defense. At 7:30, as students filed into the auditorium, Thorne stood in his office rehearsing his speech in front of a full-length mirror. He adjusted his red tie. The speech was a masterpiece of corporate edu-speak. It was filled with phrases like data-driven accountability and future-ready learning environments. He had statistics ready about the 47 expulsions and the 18% rise in test scores. He had graphs. He did not have the names of the children he'd expelled. He had forgotten them by the second week. In the teacher's lounge, a different conversation was happening. Ms. Chen, the 6th grade math teacher who had watched 5 of her students get expelled, was crying silently into a paper towel. "He's going to announce more cuts, I can feel it." Mr. Davies, the history teacher, put a hand on her shoulder. "We have to do something." But what? They had no union. They had signed contracts with a morality clause that Thorne had reinterpreted to mean any public dissent is grounds for termination. They were trapped. Maria dropped Jamal at the library with Mrs. Gable, the ancient librarian who had survived 6 principals by being sweetly deaf to controversy. "He'll be just fine, dear," Mrs. Gable said, not looking up from her crossword. Maria hesitated at the door, watching Jamal head straight for the picture books. Her stomach was in knots. The meeting was in 6 hours. She had no plan, only a desperate, stubborn love. The auditorium filled with the rustling of 800 students. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and adolescent sweat. Thorne walked onto the stage at exactly 8:15. The squeak of his shoes on the polished floor was the only sound. He stood at the podium, tapped the microphone twice, and began. "Students, faculty, we are here today to celebrate a transformation." His voice was flat, amplified, bouncing off the cinderblock walls. He talked about the new Oakwood. He put up a slide with a bar graph. The red bar, labeled Discipline Incidents, was shrinking. The green bar, labeled Academic Excellence, was growing. "This," he said, pointing at the space between the bars, "is the cost of greatness. It is the space where we choose excellence over excuses." In the third row, a sophomore named Malik, whose best friend Darius had been expelled in September, clenched his fists so tight his nails left half-moons in his palms. Thorne continued, "Some will tell you our methods are harsh. I tell you they are necessary. The world does not give second chances for willful disobedience. The world does not award certificates for mere attendance. We are preparing you for that world." Then he paused. He leaned into the microphone, his face illuminated by the harsh stage lights. "And to that end, we must be uncompromising, even with ourselves. Starting today, we are implementing a new attendance protocol for all non-enrolled persons on campus. This includes the children of staff members who are not students of Oakwood." A wave of murmurs went through the faculty section. Maria, standing at the back of the auditorium near the exit doors, felt the blood drain from her face. He was announcing it to everyone. He was making an example of her son before she'd even had the chance to plead her case. "This is not personal," Thorne said, though his tone suggested it was entirely personal. "It is about the integrity of our learning environment. We cannot have distractions. We cannot have exceptions. If we are to ask our students to follow the rules, we must follow them ourselves." He was about to continue to his next slide when a side door to the auditorium swung open. Mrs. Gable, flustered, poked her head in. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, but the microphone picked it up. "The little one, he just ran out. I turned around for 1 second." All eyes turned to the door, and there was Jamal. He stood in the doorway, a small, dark figure backlit by the hallway lights, clutching his backpack. He looked at the sea of faces, at the teacher on stage. He saw his mother at the back, her hand over her mouth. The entire room held its breath. Thorne's composure cracked for just a second. Irritation flashed across his face. "Young man, this is an assembly. You need to return to the library immediately." But Jamal didn't move. He took a step forward, then another, walking down the center aisle. He wasn't running. He was walking with a purpose that seemed impossible for a 4-year-old. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft scuff of his sneakers on the linoleum. Maria started to move from the back, but a hand on her arm stopped her. It was Mr. Davies, the history teacher. He shook his head just once. His eyes were wide, urgent. "Wait." Jamal reached the steps to the stage. He looked up at Thorne, who was now glaring down at him from behind the podium. Then, with a determination that defied his size, Jamal climbed the 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. He walked across the stage to the auxiliary microphone stand that had been set up for student council speeches. It was too tall for him. Thorne found his voice. "That is enough. Get down from there." Jamal ignored him. He reached up, stood on his tiptoes, and with both small hands pulled the microphone down to his level. The screech of feedback pierced the room. Then his voice, small but clear, amplified to every corner. "My name is Jamal." He paused, looking out at the audience. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't crying, he was just stating a fact. "My mama works here. She makes the grilled cheese. She says it's the secret ingredient that makes it not sad." A few nervous giggles from the younger students were quickly shushed. He took a deep breath, his little chest puffing out in the oversized polo shirt. "I color in the cafeteria. I am quiet. I don't got a daddy here, just my mama. She says be good so I can stay. I try to be good." He looked directly at Principal Thorne, who was frozen, a statue of stunned fury. You took away Malik's friend, Darius. He shared his fruit cup with me once. You took away the girl who draws the good horses. You took away the big kid who helped me open my milk. He listed them, one by one, the 47 anchors, not as data points but as people, as shared fruit cups and opened milk cartons and drawings of horses. The entire student body was leaning forward. Teachers were crying openly. My mama got a letter. She cried last night. She thinks I didn't hear. She thinks I'm sleeping. Jamal's voice wavered for the first time. He gripped the microphone tighter. You send me away, who gonna help her make the grilled cheese not sad? He looked out at the rows of students, his chin trembling but held high. You keep taking kids away, who gonna be left to learn? Then he did the bravest thing. He turned away from the audience, away from the hundreds of staring eyes, and took 2 steps toward Principal Thorne. He looked up at the man who held all the power, the man with the storm inside him, and he asked a simple, devastating question. Mr. Principal, are you lonely too? The words hung in the air, suspended in the feedback hum of the microphone. They were not an accusation. They were an observation, a child's diagnosis of a sickness no data point could capture. For 10 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Thorne's face went through a seismic shift, shock, anger, embarrassment, and then, for a fleeting instant, something that looked like profound, terrifying recognition. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The laminated discipline matrix in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole through his suit. Then from the back of the auditorium, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was Maria. Tears streamed down her face, but she clapped slow and steady. Then Mr. Davies joined. Then Ms. Chen. Then Malik in the 3rd row stood up and started clapping. Then the girl next to him. Then a wave of students rising to their feet, not cheering but clapping in a solid, rhythmic, undeniable wave of sound that filled the room and washed over the stage. Thorne stood isolated behind his podium, the graphs of his success blinking uselessly on the screen behind him, as the sound of 800 people acknowledging a truth he'd refused to see crashed over him. He looked at Jamal, who was still standing by the microphone, looking confused by the noise. He looked at Maria, who was staring right back at him, her expression not triumphant but human. And in that moment, the entire architecture of his reset crumbled into dust. But this was only the beginning, because in the 5th row, a student named Sophia had her phone out. She had recorded the entire thing, and as the applause continued, her thumb hovered over the post button. The caption was already written. A 4-year-old just said what we've all been too scared to say. She tagged the local news. She tagged the NAACP. She tagged every education activist she could think of. She pressed post. The video hit the internet at 10:17 a.m. By 10:45, it had 10,000 views. By noon, it had gone viral. Local news stations interrupted their programming. National education blogs picked it up. The hashtag #AreYouLonely2 started trending. The algorithm, in its cold, precise way, had found the perfect story. A tiny hero, a faceless villain, and a question that cut to the bone. Inside Oakwood, time split in 2. There was the official timeline, where an administrator tried to usher a stunned Jamal off the stage, and Thorne, white-knuckling the podium, dismissed the assembly. And then there was the real timeline, where the school had already transformed into something else entirely. In the hallway, students who hadn't spoken to each other all year were hugging. Teachers were gathered in hushed, urgent clusters. The Choose to Be Here banners suddenly looked like cruel jokes. Malik, the sophomore, walked up to Maria as she scooped a trembling Jamal into her arms. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice thick, "thank your son for all of us." Then he handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a list. Every expelled student's name, their grade, and what they were really like. Darius, captain of the mathletes. Chloe, who wrote poetry. Isaiah, who could fix any computer. 47 names. Maria held the list like it was something holy. But here, where the story twists, the district office didn't see a hero. They saw a public relations nightmare of nuclear proportions. The superintendent, Dr. Abigail Vance, watched the video in her leather chair with the sound off. She didn't see a child's courage. She saw liability. She saw the carefully constructed defense against the NAACP complaint evaporating. Her first call wasn't to Maria. It wasn't to the school. It was to the district's crisis communications firm. Their strategy was immediate and brutal: containment. They issued a press release at 1 p.m. stating that an unauthorized minor disrupted a school assembly and that the matter is being addressed internally. They made no mention of Jamal's question, no mention of the expulsions. They reframed the entire event as a security breach. Then they turned their attention to Thorne. He was summoned to the district office for an emergency consultation. When he arrived, he wasn't taken to Dr. Vance's office. He was placed in a small, windowless conference room usually reserved for union negotiations. He sat there for 47 minutes, a symbolic number he did not appreciate. When Dr. Vance finally entered, she didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. "Marcus, what in the name of public education were you thinking?" Thorne, still clinging to his data, tried to pivot. "The child was unsupervised. It validates our new attendance protocol. We can use this to—" "Use it?" Vance cut him off, her voice a whip crack. "The video has 3 million views. The NAACP has scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning. The governor's office called. They want to know why a 4-year-old is giving a more compelling speech on educational equity than my entire administration." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a spreadsheet, but not one of his. It was a demographic breakdown of the 47 expulsions, cross-referenced with state discrimination guidelines. The numbers, when isolated like that, were indefensible. "You were supposed to fix a school, Marcus, not create a textbook case for disparate impact. You turned our district into a national headline for the worst possible reason." For the first time, Thorne's certainty wavered. "The test scores, the discipline data, you saw the reports." "I saw numbers," Vance snapped. "I didn't see the faces, and now, thanks to a lunch lady's kid, the entire world is seeing the faces. Your reset is over, effective immediately." She outlined the damage control plan. Thorne would be placed on paid administrative leave. The district would publicly announce a top-to-bottom review of Oakwood's discipline policies. They would express deep concern for the Ray's family and promise a thorough investigation. They would offer to reinstate the expelled students, a gesture they knew most families, now enrolled elsewhere or too traumatized to return, would likely refuse. Thorne was to be the sacrificial lamb, the lone bad actor. The district would survive by pinning everything on him. He drove back to Oakwood in silence. The storm inside him had quieted, replaced by a hollow, ringing numbness. He walked into his office past teachers who deliberately looked away. He closed the door. For a long time, he just stared at the framed newspaper article on his desk. "Zero tolerance or zero compassion." He took it down. Underneath it, on the wood, was a faint rectangle of dust, a perfect outline of his failure. Meanwhile, Maria's world was exploding in a different way. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from daytime talk shows, from news networks, from strangers offering money and legal help. A national teachers' union offered to pay for any legal fees. A famous children's book author sent Jamal a box of books with a note, "For the bravest boy in America." But with the spotlight came the shadow. Online comment sections filled with vitriol, racist messages calling her a welfare queen exploiting her child, angry parents from other schools accusing her of raising a disrespectful brat. One email threatened to call Child Protective Services for emotional abuse. Maria, who had spent a lifetime being invisible, was now exposed from every angle. That evening, as she tried to get Jamal to sleep, he looked at her from his pillow. "Mama, did I do a bad thing?" Her heart shattered. "No, Mijo, you did a brave thing, the bravest thing." But she could see the confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand viral fame or systemic racism. He understood that he had asked a question, and now strange people were yelling outside their window. real turning point, the moment the story exploded from a viral clip into a full-blown movement, happened at 9 p.m. A former Oakwood teacher, a woman named Keisha Johnson who had resigned in October, published a long thread on social media. She didn't just share the video. She attached documents, internal emails from Thorne instructing teachers to document every minor infraction for students on a watch list, meeting notes where Thorne referred to certain neighborhoods as high-risk zones, and a damning, off-the-record quote from a district official captured on a voice memo saying, "Thorne's methods are harsh, but they get the numbers we need for state funding." The thread went nuclear. It was no longer about one principal. It was about a system that incentivized pushing out struggling kids to boost averages, a system that saw children as liabilities on a balance sheet. The school board emergency meeting, scheduled for the next day, was now a national event. News vans lined the street. Protesters, parents, and students from across the city gathered outside the district office, holding signs with Jamal's question, "Are you lonely too?" Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was one of pure panic. Dr. Vance's plan to scapegoat Thorne was crumbling under the weight of the leaked emails. The board members, most of them elected officials, were now facing the wrath of their constituents in real time. And in a quiet corner of the chaotic lobby, Maria Reyes waited. She had been subpoenaed to speak. She wore her only dress, a simple blue one she saved for church. Jamal was with her sister. She held Malik's list of 47 names in her hands, the paper now soft from being folded and refolded. A young reporter with kind eyes approached her. "Ms. Reyes, what are you hopping for today?" Maria looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the imposing doors of the boardroom. She thought of the cold cafeteria, the empty seats, the sound of her own heart pounding as her son walked onto that stage. She wasn't a public speaker. She was a lunch lady, but she had learned the weight of words. "I'm hopping," she said, her voice steady, "that they start listening to the children they're supposed to serve, not just the ones with the high scores, all of them." Just then the boardroom doors opened. An aide called her name. The crowd parted, the cameras swiveled. As Maria walked forward, list in hand, she passed Principal Thorne. He was standing off to the side, alone, waiting to be called in for his professional execution. Their eyes met. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement, a passing of the torch in the most painful way possible. Maria entered the boardroom. The members, 13 of them, sat behind a long mahogany dais looking down at her. The air was cold, formally so. Dr. Vance offered a thin, professional smile. "Ms. Reyes, thank you for coming. Please state your name for the record." Maria looked at the microphone on the table. It was just like the one Jamal had used. She leaned forward, and with a clarity that surprised even her, she began not with her name, but with a number. 47. Her voice filled the silent room. "That's how many children you allowed to be removed from Oakwood Elementary. I have their names here. But before I read them, I want to tell you what my son taught me yesterday. He taught me that a system that forgets the names of the children it fails isn't just broken, it's lonely." She placed the list on the dais. The question isn't whether Principal Thorne was wrong. The question is why his spreadsheet mattered more than these 47 stories. And what are you going to do to bring them home? She had just reframed the entire investigation. It was no longer about punishing one man. It was about repairing the damage done to 47 children. The board members shifted uncomfortably. The cameras in the back of the room zoomed in. The livestream viewer count spiked. And outside, watching on his phone, Marcus Thorne finally understood the true cost of his trade-off. He hadn't just expelled students. He had expelled their futures. And the data point that would forever define his career wasn't a test score percentage. It was a 4-year-old boy asking a question he still couldn't answer. The school board's vote was unanimous, but it wasn't the end. It was the first admission of fault in a decade. They passed an emergency resolution that afternoon. Marcus Thorne was officially terminated, not placed on leave. The zero-tolerance discipline matrix was abolished immediately, and a mandate was issued: contact every one of the 47 expelled students and their families, not with a form letter, with a personal phone call, an invitation to return, an apology. But here's what the headlines didn't capture. An apology doesn't unring a bell. It doesn't erase the shame of being walked out of your school by security. It doesn't give back the months of lost learning. Of the 47 families, only 23 chose to return to Oakwood. The others had moved on, enrolled in other districts, or simply lost faith in the system entirely. For them, the damage was a permanent scar. The district appointed an interim principal, Dr. Evelyn Moss, a veteran educator known for her work in restorative justice. Her first act was to take down the "Choose to Be Here" banners. Her second was to hold a school-wide assembly. She didn't stand at the podium. She sat on the edge of the stage, a microphone in her hand. "This school hurt people," she said, her voice clear and calm. "We are going to spend this year learning how to heal. It starts by listening." She reinstated the art program. She fired the security firm Thorne had hired and used the money to hire 2 additional counselors and a full-time social worker. The laminated rules outside the principal's office were replaced by a single sheet of paper with 3 questions. What happened? Who was hurt? What do we need to make it right? For Maria, life became a paradox of calm and storm. The media frenzy eventually died down, replaced by the next viral sensation. The threatening emails stopped, but the consequences of her bravery were permanent and quiet. The district, as part of its settlement with the NAACP, created a new family liaison position at Oakwood. They offered it to Maria. It came with a salary triple what she made in the cafeteria, health benefits, and regular hours. She took it. She no longer served grilled cheese. She now sat in an office, helping parents navigate the very system that had tried to break her. She helped Darius's mother get him an evaluation for a learning disability he'd been struggling with for years. She connected Chloe's family with a free tutoring program. She used her newfound, hard-won authority to open doors that had been sealed shut. Jamal started kindergarten at Oakwood that fall. He was placed in Ms. Chen's class, the teacher who had cried in the lounge. On his first day, he walked in holding his mother's hand, wearing a new polo shirt that actually fit. Ms. Chen knelt down to his level. "Welcome, Jamal. We've been waiting for you." He was, by all accounts, a quiet, kind student. He did not become a mascot. He did not like talking about the assembly. When other kids asked him about it, he would shrug and say, "I just asked a question." He preferred drawing pictures and building block towers. The storm, it seemed, had passed through him and moved on. But what about the man at the center of the storm? Marcus Thorne disappeared from public view. He sold his house in the district and moved to a different state. The educational leadership career he'd spent 25 years building was over. He became a ghost in the industry, a cautionary tale whispered at conferences. Then, a year after the assembly, a small blog published an essay titled "The View from the Podium." It was written by an anonymous former administrator. In it, the author described the moment a child's question dismantled his entire philosophy. He didn't ask for sympathy. He described the cold, clinical loneliness of reducing children to data points. He wrote about finally understanding that the silence he had created in the halls wasn't order, it was fear. And he ended with a line that would later be quoted in graduate school ethics courses. "I was measuring the wrong thing. I was counting the empty desks and calling it success." Everyone in education circles knew who had written it. Thorne never confirmed it, but he never denied it either. The most surprising detail, the one that never made the news, emerged 2 years later. Oakwood Elementary, under its new leadership and with its focus on support over punishment, saw its test scores rise again. But more importantly, its suspension rate dropped to nearly zero. Student attendance improved. Teacher turnover plummeted. A study from a nearby university cited Oakwood as a case study in how replacing punitive discipline with restorative practices can improve both school climate and academic outcomes. The thorn effect had been completely inverted. The very metrics he'd worshipped had improved not by removing children, but by embracing them. In the spring of that year, Oakwood held a ceremony to dedicate a new community garden. Students, teachers, and parents planted vegetables and flowers in raised beds built by the shop class. As the crowd gathered, Dr. Moss took the microphone. "We wanted a symbol of growth," she said, "of things that need care and patience and good soil to thrive." She then called Maria to the front. "This garden needs a head gardener, someone who understands nourishment from the roots up." She handed Maria a small, shiny key to the tool shed. The crowd applauded. Maria, who had spent years feeding children from a serving line, now held the key to a garden where they would learn to feed themselves. As people mingled, eating cookies and lemonade, a familiar car pulled up to the curb across the street. It sat there for a long time, engine off. Behind the wheel was Marcus Thorne. He had driven 6 hours. He didn't get out. He just watched through the passenger window. He saw children laughing, digging in the dirt. He saw Maria showing a group of 5th graders how to plant tomato seedlings. He saw Jamal, now a 1st grader, carefully carrying a watering can twice his size. His face was unreadable. Then, just before he drove away, he did something unexpected. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. It wasn't for anyone to see. It was a private ceremony, an acknowledgement that the world had moved on and grown without him, that the system had corrected its course. He started the car and left, and he never came back. That evening, Maria tucked Jamal into bed. He was reading a book about planets, sounding out the big words. "Mama," he said, looking up, "is our school happy now?" Maria smoothed his hair. She thought of the garden, of the returned students, of the quiet hum of a building no longer ruled by fear. "It's learning how to be," she said, "just like us." And in that house, in that neighborhood, with a key to a garden shed on the kitchen counter and a child sleeping soundly down the hall, it finally felt like something had not just ended, but properly begun. The story of the lunch lady's son wasn't about toppling a principal. It was about reminding a broken system of its own name. It was about the courage to ask a simple question in a room full of silence, and in doing so, teaching everyone the answer. The story of Oakwood Elementary traveled far beyond its own auditorium. It became a lesson plan in humility for school districts across the country. A reminder that the most sophisticated data system in the world cannot measure the cost of a child who believes they are not welcome in their own school. In the years that followed, over 24 districts reviewed and revised their own zero-tolerance policies, not because of a new law, but because of a question asked by a 4-year-old. Are you lonely too? That question, it turns out, was the diagnosis for a sickness infecting not just one principal, but an entire approach to education. It asked if a system designed to measure success had forgotten how to feel connection. It asked if we had built institutions so focused on filtering out the problem kids that we'd filtered out our own humanity in the process. Maria Reyes still works at Oakwood. She still knows every child's name. But now, instead of serving them lunch, she helps remove the barriers that make them hungry for acceptance in the first place. Jamal is in 3rd grade. He likes science and says he wants to be a gardener when he grows up, to make things grow. He doesn't remember the assembly very well. For him, it's a story his mama tells about being brave. For the rest of us, it's a story about what happens when the person with the least institutional power speaks the most profound truth. We tell stories like this not because they have fairy tale endings, but because they show us the cracks where light gets in. They show us that sometimes change doesn't come from a boardroom or a policy paper. It comes from a small voice in a quiet room, refusing to accept that silence is the same as order. It comes from a mother's love meeting a moment that demands courage. It comes from remembering that before a child is a test score, or a behavior referral, or a data point on a graph, they are a person. And people, when seen, when heard, have the power to change everything. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a time someone stood up for you, or a time you found the courage to speak up for someone else, then you're why we do this. Subscribe to this channel. We are dedicated to finding and telling the human stories behind the headlines, the quiet moments of courage that reshape our world. Share your own story in the comments. Tell us about a teacher who saw you or a moment you chose connection over fear, because these stories are not just something we watch. They are something we carry and something we continue. Thanks for listening.